Hello. Welcome to another episode of Not DnD, which is brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. I'm your host, Jessica, and this week with me, I'm very excited to have a guest. Talking about Brave Zenith, we have Giuliano. Giuliano, would you introduce yourself to everybody, please?
Hi. My name's Giuliano. I'm a writer and game designer. Mostly work in RPGs. I love I love anime, RPGs, food, and that's basically what I write about in my games, and of course Brazilian culture. And that's kind of it.
Those are all really great favorite things to have and to put into games. So I think a lot of people will agree and approve. So like we said, we're going to be talking about your game, Brave Zenith, which is an award-winning game of the year by the
Yes.
Indie Groundbreaker Awards. So congratulations on that. So if you do have any questions and you're watching us live right now, please feel free to put your questions in the comments and we'll answer throughout the stream. And if you're listening to the podcast, well, you can catch us live at 10 p.m. BST every Monday on twitch.tv/EM Publishing to have your questions answered. So before we jump in to talk about the game, I'd like to talk a little bit about you first. So the question I ask all of my guests is, when did you start playing role-playing games? What was your first kind of memories of playing tabletop RPGs?
I think my first memory. My brother he used to play RPGs.
Oh, cool.
So he owned a lot of books, and I mostly just read them in secret. He kept on his closet, and
Okay.
I was.
Stole
They were,
older brothers, yeah.
yeah. They were the vampire books.
Oh, yeah.
Vampire the Masquerade. So like, I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't supposed to read them. But then the
Oh,
first
okay.
time I actually played was when he GM'd the game of Vampire the Masquerade for me
Oh,
when I was
nice.
a teenager, and
Mm-hmm.
alongside around the same time I played. There was a school event at my school, and they sent some GMs from, I think, a local publisher, and uh, they ran a short one shot of AD&D second edition, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, those are like the first forays into RPGs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hooked ever since then. So when did you start creating and writing games instead of just being somebody who plays and enjoys them?
It was when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
I hanged around. I hang around a lot in the Google Plus spaces that
Mm-hmm.
existed back when Google Plus existed, and a lot of folks were making stuff that
Mm-hmm.
either on blogs or like making zines, and it was just kind of be around there and seeing
Mm-hmm.
people who, let's say, who people who weren't calling themselves writers writing books basically.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was inspiring because it made me feel like I could do it. Like I always thought,
Yeah.
I, I always thought like writing is like, it's like art, like painting and that stuff. You
Mm-hmm.
kind of born with the gift, whatever. And so to see like people who are not, let's say, talented doing it, like everyone was doing it. No, like
Yeah.
no shade, but like because it was such a community effort. Like they
Yeah.
had like
Yeah.
tables people would fill in.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone would do an entry, and that was like fun. There were like little bits of writing you could do here and there.
Mm-hmm.
It was very casual, so that also like kind of made it exciting.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I met a couple folks, and we got together to do a zine that never came out. It was
Mm-hmm.
super fun. I still talk to them to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that was kind of how I got started. And then when Google Plus died, I I kind of went to Twitter, and
Mm-hmm.
I met some folks like Contijo, who's a Brazilian layout guy, and
Mm-hmm.
Nate Trem, that it's from Highland Paranormal Society, I think he
Mm-hmm.
does, and they were talking about pamphlet adventures, and how you can make them if you don't have a budget, basically, like you don't
Yeah.
have art.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, let's try doing this. I got a couple of friends, and we wrote Pacto's Terrifying Cuisine, which is the first adventure I released
Mm-hmm.
officially as a pamphlet adventure, and it did really well.
Awesome.
Yeah, like surprisingly so, and that kind of just started everything going.
And now you're making all sorts of games, winning awards,
Yeah,
and yeah, writing a lot of the time. And so your kind of day job beforehand, was it in kind of advertising or marketing? Did you
yeah,
say? Yeah.
yeah.
And did that have like a few transferable skills for kind of creating and layout and things like that, or is it something completely different?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, no. There's a lot of stuff because advertising, advertising college is
Hmm.
not, most of it is not advertising. It's communication, right?
Sure.
You go to a communication college that has an emphasis in advertising, and a lot of the skills you learn are to do with, like, let's say, traditional publishing stuff. So you learn in
Hmm.
design, Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, all this softwares that like kind of help. But also you do take classes in writing and just communication in general. So it is
Hmm.
very helpful. And I don't know,
Yeah.
like the advertising part. Like I think I do a terrible job advertising, and also because
Oh no.
advertising. No, no, it's just that advertising as in practical, like real world, it's not even, you can be great writer, great copywriter, whatever,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day it's, and this is my opinion of course, but it's like it's money. Like if you don't have the money to advertise, it's not going to work, especially in digital
Yeah.
platforms.
Yeah.
uh but yeah, I think that this communication school kind of
Hmm.
school of thought really helps. It's just they teach you how to be creative in a way, and that's really interesting. And yeah, definitely a skill that transfer over.
Yeah. I only asked because I did my degree in advertising as well. And when I
Oh,
saw that, when I was doing some research before, I was like, maybe this is old people that went into advertising now work in RPGs. We've given up on it. But yeah. But we're here specifically to talk about obviously Brave Zenith. If you could give us a little pitch for that. So if you were describing the game to somebody that hasn't heard of it yet, how would you do that?
it's a very simple creativity first RPG inspired by summer nights playing PS1 games on a pirated PS1. So you're playing games you don't quite understand because they're in different languages. They are completely different from what you're used to, and you're in this warm, hazy summer night. That's kind of how I envision it,
Hmm.
and the rules kind of do a lot of the. You are always. I try to do everything in a way that whoever's playing is invited to create something,
Hmm.
be it their abilities or just like how the world works. I'm a very big fan, of course, of like these more sparse RPGs, where like the
Hmm.
setting is not so defined; it is more broad
Hmm.
strokes. Because, yeah, that's like I'm going. I'm just
Yeah,
going.
no, no. Well, we've got time to talk about it, so don't you worry. You can keep on going. But yeah, I love the sound of this game because of kind of the setting as well, because it's kind of post apocalyptic. Could you talk about kind of the setting a little bit of the game?
Yeah, everyone. It's easy to call it post-apocalyptic, but like
Hmm.
I don't see it as post-apocalyptic. I call it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a naming thing. I just call it
Hmm.
post fantasy because it's more about taking fantasy.
Hmm.
I consider it a fantasy game, right? But it's more
Hmm.
about taking fantasy and using like the post apocalyptic tropes to kind of give it a more usable language. Because
Hmm.
Brazenif came from me. I had an open table at my college, and I played a lot of folks who didn't play RPGs ever,
Yeah.
and like I kind of noticed like what they like, what they were struggling with, and
Hmm.
I tried to find a game that could run that, and then I made the game that it was that Brave Zenith.
Yeah.
And the things I noticed was like people feel really awkward when talking about fantasy stuff, like fantasy names,
Hmm.
like elven names. They always go like they have
Yeah.
way too many apostrophes and too many letters, or like saying stuff like people don't like knights in armor. But if you give them like language that they understand, I
Hmm.
found that worked better. So like I started instead of trying to keep everything like in a way immersive and talking about uh, like say period appropriate stuff, I would use examples from the real world. And I know like a lot of people do that when they play games. Like
Yeah.
you describe stuff using normal day-to-day stuff. Like you don't say like, oh, it's like a big lizard. So you say it's a dragon, whatever. People kind of
Yeah.
figure that out, but also
Hmm.
to the other stuff. So a lot of Brave Zenith is kind of just trying to make it easier to say it without feeling awkward.
Yeah.
So what I try to do.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah,
I really like the look of it because it seems really accessible, and a lot of what we're trying to do, the Not D&D show, is get people to try new systems or just to try tabletop RPGs for the first time. And I think what you were saying there is so true, that it can seem really intimidating if there's this big fantasy kind of D&D setting and there's all this world lore and knowledge,
yeah,
and yeah, and you don't know it, whereas
yeah,
like this game isn't like that. You don't
yeah.
have to come having done a load of research.
It's like the best example
Hmm.
I can think of. I heard it recently. I was watching Sean McCoy, who did Mothership, talk about
Hmm.
why like horror RPGs are kind of easier to get into, is because people kind of know how things work because it is set in the real
Yeah.
world. So people know the names, how things work, how naming works. Like they feel more
Hmm.
comfortable. And
Yeah.
horror is really easy to do that also because like we know how
Yeah.
it is to be afraid.
Hmm.
We love horror movies and all that stuff. So that's that looking for that way of doing that with fantasy, which I really like fantasy, but like
Yeah.
we end up with these dumb names and dumb things all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes just taking that, making kind of fun of it, and trying to make it more accessible in that sense. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about the kind of characters that people will be playing in the game. So I wanted to talk about the origins, because I saw there was, of course, humans, which I was like, yeah, of course. And then we went into catfolk, and then we had jellies as well, which is very intriguing to me. So could you talk about the different origins in the game?
yeah, so we have three origins. One of them is humans. The twist for the humans in this one is that they are like they have created ideology and they're addicted to ideology, so they kind of make their whole society around that. It's kind of like a jokey thing,
Hmm.
uh, but that is the idea. And then cat folk are like just cats that gain sentience, and they're still cats, but they are also very open and welcoming to people. They are like accomplished cooks, and it's not just because of cooking, but because they like meeting people and sharing a meal with
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
And the jellies, they're like the newcomers. They are
Hmm.
little jellies that have sprouted from the ground,
Amazing.
oozed. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and since they're the new guys, it's the kind of deal where they have no social norms. Like they don't have no prejudices. They're brand new, like in a way. So they're trying to see everything. They're trying to interpret everything and kind of just figure out what they want, who they are.
Yeah, it was the inspiration for the jelly's origin meant to be kind of like new players exploring the world, or
When I started talking now, I kind of imagine how that could be interpreted, but no, it was
oh
more
right.
like, um, yeah, it's just supposed to be the weird little guys
Mm-hmm.
that people love playing, and
Mm-hmm.
the idea was actually like I stole it from like Dragon Ball Z, like there's Majin Buu. It's like just a
Okay.
big jelly, and I like that, and he changes shapes, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the idea. It was not that deep, just very
It's not that deep. Okay, me looking for it. So
this
a
game.
lot. You were saying as well, a lot of the so you're a fan of kind of JRPGs,
Yes.
and is that can that be seen in the game? Is that an inspiration point as well?
Yeah, it's just the main map of the game. Uh, the name of the location where the world's set, the archipelago, which is also called the nest, is almost like a copy of Chrono Cross's world map.
Hmm.
If I should look at it, it has some of the same ideas behind it because I really like Chrono Cross. Because when I played as a kid, it had a tropical setting. It was set on the
Hmm.
beach, and
Yeah.
I grew up in a city in a beach, no,
Hmm.
and it was just so cool seeing the elements that you see in a tropical country, uh, so I love that, and I brought it back for this. And there's other small references, like the world map has that Chrono Cross reference, but it also has like a continent that is shrouded in mist, which is something that a lot of JRPGs do, which is like the
Yeah.
final area. It's supposed to be where the big bad guy is, and I kind of wanted to bring that. It also, like, on the way the game is laid out, the inspirations were mostly old, SNES, NES cartridge,
Oh yeah.
boxes and instruction booklets. That kind of very colorful, very lively. Just make it more exciting to read, really. And the classes, yeah, it's full of little details from JRPGs, like the classes called vocations because of job systems, just to make more close to saying job system without saying job system.
Yeah.
The classes are based off, of course, the classical archetypes, but also from. I wanted to give them very iconic looks and feel like they do with the jobs in Final Fantasy. Like you look at Black Mage, pointy hat, blue robes, that kind of deal. And that was a lot of the work with the artists was done to ensure that, and also like the choice of classes to keep it as fewer as possible, and to keep them as unique. Like I wanted to do a lot
Yeah.
more. I did a lot more, but in the end, I chose to keep them more unique and more visually distinctive as much as we could. And yeah, it's full of bits and references everywhere. Uh,
That's awesome.
If
With
people like
the
these games, they'll find it.
Excellent. It sounds like there's lots of like nods to it in there. So if that's your thing, you'll find it. But I think if that's not necessarily your thing, you're not going to be lost. You don't need to have that kind of information necessarily to enjoy the game. With if we could talk about the vocations a little bit, because when you're creating your character, we talked about you'll have your origins. So you'll pick whether you're a human, cat folk, or one of the jellies, and then you'll pick kind of your vocations. So could you talk us through them? Because I saw on there was mixologist, which I was quite excited about. But I'm sure there are other
Everyone
things.
loves mixologist.
Sorry, it's British culture. We have an issue with that over here.
Yeah. And I absolutely adore the mixologist. It's probably
Yeah.
my second favorite illustration in the book is the mixologist because he has
Okay.
bongs for boots. That's like a stupid idea our artist had. But yeah, we got the freelancer, which is the more traditional fighter type. It's the simplest class. It's like cliche, like in a way you want to play more straightforward as possible. It is the
Yeah.
class that has no like in the abilities section has no creative input, but like there are some small details like what kind of jacket you wear, what kind of cool things you, how you express yourself in these other elements of the class, be it, in this case the equipment. We had the magic user, which it uses a spell system that's just taking two words together and creating a spell out of it. But also
Okay.
they have just the mixing of taking mundane items and making them more fantasy. So like the illustration really sells that. I think if I remember correctly, the mage's staff is a squeaky kind of cleaner or broom, I believe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
and to make that kind of joke. Then we have the mixologist, who's supposed to be kind of a cleric class, the healer, but he's got magical booze, which you add an adjective to it,
Amazing.
and that adjective is what it is, what the grog that he has is. And we got the thief, which is also very self-explanatory. It was this is like a fun little story. This is some people like
Oh yeah.
when we released the playtest version. Every class had an illustration except the thief because still wasn't done. But so it left like it was just a white page, like the invisible stalker in the monster manual. And people thought that was on purpose. Like the thief was supposed to be sneaky, and not be caught. And like when we added the illustration, people were like, "Wait, if we actually had an art, like we thought it was the point was not having anything." So people got confused with that.
I
Uh,
mean, that would be an art choice to just like have them be absent on the page. Fair enough.
yeah, I mean, again, not I'm not that clever. Uh, it was one of those moments I was like, that was actually pretty good, but I already paid for the art, so I'm gonna
So
put
we're
it in.
using it, yeah.
We're using it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and a thief is more like it can resist opening locks. He's like more in exploration based kind of needs, and he can make disguises. That's his whole thing. Like he can make copies, forgeries, very easily, and that's his deal. We had the hunter, which is camouflage dude with a pet. So the pet is your creative input. What kind of pet you have. It's really fun too. It's one of these details that I don't think if I always wonder if people catch on, but he has a gun, but his gun doesn't work and has no ammo. But we don't say it like it's just like we don't say it in description. It's just in the gear.
Okay,
You have to make just connection that there's no ammo and it's
okay,
just for shows. So
okay.
it's kind of like that. Or
Mm-hmm.
like, for instance, not every class has a weapon
Mm-hmm.
with a starting set, but actually they all do have a weapon. It's just not obvious at first. But most
Yeah.
people, when they play, they catch on to that really fast. It's
Mm-hmm.
really fun. And then the final vocations, the dancer, which is the weirdest one, and the one most people like. Mixologist and the dancer are the one people really like. So the
Yeah.
dancer is like he's tuned into the rhythm of the world, like so he's
Mm-hmm.
like good vibes, dude. He's kind of uncanny in the sense that he can feel vibrations, and his abilities is one of the funnest one. He has psychometry. I don't even know how to say it, which is a kind of a pseudoscience thing where you can feel the memories of anything you touch, like you have
Oh,
access to
okay.
that.
Yeah.
So he kind of is like that. He's like all the vibes, kind of an antenna to the world, like he's
Cool.
picking up everything and dancing. And it's kind of supposed to be the monk archetype, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. Like he fights without weapons, his dance moves or weapons, and those are the five. Five. I don't remember.
Yeah. Those are some of the vocations that you can play in the
Five.
game. Excellent. So when you're making your character for the game, we've gone to you kind of pick your origin, you pick your vocation. Is there any kind of other decisions you need to make when creating your character for the game, or?
Yeah, there's the final step is choosing
Hmm.
qualities. It
Hmm.
will actually choose backgrounds, but backgrounds are really straightforward. They
Okay.
are they're the social group from which your character came from, and they used to just kind of help you think about your character. For instance, if both like two players pick the same class, what makes them
Yeah.
different is like,
Hmm.
oh, one of them has a proletariat background and another one has the artist background. So like what, and it's more asking like what, how do you think each freelancer is different in this case, and each one has descriptions that kind of give you the vibe of what it is, but it's just general like factions in a way that your character belong to or belongs to. And then the final step is the quality system, which is basically again to try and help people create characters, make this easier. It's basically just picking something that makes your character special and unique and putting right next to a stat so that it boosts your stats in certain situations. And we give examples of it can be anything in the sense that it can be that you're bald, that you're tall, that you're divorced. It can be anything like either
Enthusiastic.
yeah, either physical or emotional, really anything.
Yeah.
And we kind of ask people to be specific because these are
Hmm.
like the defining qualities of your
Hmm.
get it qualities, defining qualities of your character.
Yeah.
And we also like try to give some help when trying to think of this. So start thinking about your class,
Hmm.
your vocation. So like what kind of things that a magic user does. Like oh, magic users are like nerds. So you could put like you're a big
Hmm.
nerd, or like you're addicted to books. Like some of the favorite ones I've seen is color
Yeah.
theory.
Okay.
Um, like a knack for style was one people put in too.
Hmm.
And they're used like in the idea is that you try to use them, interpret them as like really go wide with interpretation so you can abuse the system.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so people would try to use them in wild ways. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of the quality system. I
Hmm.
think it's better explained in the book than I'm explaining right now. And
Sure.
it's usually something that people really just catch on really easily because
Hmm.
you start by adding two at the beginning, but
Hmm.
by as you level up you add more, and then by then people, oh, I know what I'm going to add in. Oh, I know, like I already know who my character is, so it flows better.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's
definitely.
basically the sum up of character creation. You choose an origin, you choose a vocation, a background, and you add qualities to your stats,
Hmm.
and that's it.
So this is something you could do really quickly with a bunch of new players before you're starting the game. So people don't have to kind of go away and make their character. They can come to the table and kind of do it all together. It felt like that sort of kind of character creation process. Um, and the so running the game as well. If I understand it right, it's the mechanics are like are quite simple. So you just need two six-sided dice. You roll them, and then you add any bonuses. And I assume that's like from what you were talking about with like your qualities and things like that. And that's it. And then you just
That's it.
see if, and just depending what the target number is really for what you're trying
Yeah,
to do.
it's supposed to be really
Perfect.
simple.
Hmm.
It is supposed to be like another inspiration for the game was
Hmm.
looking at Japanese tabletop RPGs because I was like,
Hmm.
okay, I like video games now, JRPGs, but what
Yeah.
about like, the tabletop scene there? And I was
Hmm.
really fascinated by some of the same struggles that we have in Brazil.
Hmm.
As you know, the weird dice is not so easily available. So in
Okay.
Japan, they use a lot of these sixes because that's the die they had
Oh, right.
available.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
For instance, in Brazil, it's more common to find D10s because Vampire the Masquerade was absolutely huge than it
Oh,
was
right.
to
I didn't
find
know
like
that.
the
Okay.
weird dice. Like
Hmm.
I didn't have weird RPG dice for many years, uh,
Okay.
and I live in a rather, let's say, like big city, so the further away you get from that, the harder it is. So like the choice for
Yeah. Of course.
D6 was based on that too,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So everyone can play then. Yeah.
yeah, like a joke, it's like you can find everyone has a board game with like some
Yeah.
D6 right or lay around.
Yes.
Yeah, and I like them because they're tiny. I like the tiny D6s, so
Hmm.
just that, and inspired by recent games I played, of course. Like if you
Hmm.
play Disco Elysium and you read this game, you'll see a lot of similarities. Like I've taken things straight up, just same name, but just kind
Hmm.
of adapted it to the system. I was just really inspired by the way they describe skills because it's
Hmm.
very traditional in terms of system too. Like it's add number, compare it to a target number, and that's it. But the
Hmm.
way they describe the skills, I think that really helps the more creative side of things. Like they,
Hmm.
in that case of the video game, it's very strict because someone has to program everything. But like
Of
the way to
course.
describe that, I saw it as something made by people who played tabletop RPGs.
Hmm.
So I tried to bring that to the skills, which is they have really broad definitions and they are meant to be interpreted in different ways. So like there's no violence skill or something like that. There's no fighting skill. You have thrash, which is to destroy things,
Hmm.
thrash things. And the idea was that to not be specific, but to let people interpret. So people catch on really quick that they can use that for they can justify the use of that skill for like combat, but also to everything there that is tied to your body moving and using violence in general, not
Hmm.
just for combat. There's
Hmm.
there's one I really liked, the stomach, which is not just having a like strong guts, being gutsy,
Hmm.
but also literally your stomach. So like how you react to food, poison, these things, how can you
Yeah.
resist that?
Hmm.
And then the more not so not so constitutional like thing, which is the how well can you handle uh, pain, suffering in general? How can you stomach? And that's the little
Hmm.
what we do. Like, how can you stomach the world? Like, how can
Yeah.
you stomach that kind of stuff? It's not physical; it's more mental. And
Hmm.
that was kind of the way, because they do that a lot in Disco Elysium. I was like, that's like the
Okay.
best part, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I tried to bring that in, and I think all the inspirations was just I grew up
Hmm.
playing 2.5 D&D,
Yeah.
so I kind of just I love how to say, when I made this game, I wanted it to be. I think there was a review by Chris McDowell that really just he just said exactly what I wanted, which this could be someone's first and favorite RPG.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give like the classic, in a way, experience, but more streamlined, more modern, more
Hmm.
accessible. But I still
Yeah.
wanted to have like the math, the dumb. You would roll a dice and add a number, a comparative thing, which is not very practical, not very elegant, but it has a feel to it. It has a tactile feel to
Yeah.
it. It's really, to me, core of the what people expect from an RPG.
Yeah.
Um, that was part of why it's so simple too.
Definitely. So like simple and elegant definitely works with RPGs. And I mean, people have agreed, like you say, because you won. Congratulations on winning the Indie Groundbreaker Award, Game of the Year for this year. So clearly, other people agree that that simple kind of approach could be somebody's kind of first and really accessible introduction to tabletop RPGs. Talking about the actual stories in the game. So when you set off, so you've made your character, you're sat at the table. What sort of stories and adventures are the characters going to go on in Brave Zenith?
Yeah, that is the part I really like about it. Uh, the idea was, again, I love fantasy games,
Hmm.
and it can be hard to think of quests and things.
Yeah.
But then, uh, the idea in the book is to try to think of mundane things. Let's say day-to-day quests, like going visit a friend in a faraway city, cleaning your house, doing the dishes, these kind of things, and then give them a fantasy twist. And the example I give in the book, which is the Star Adventure, is you find a magic lamp, and instead of a wish, you're ordered to clean a genie's house. Like, the quest is not to.
Oh no.
It is a dungeon, but it's you're not fighting anyone in the dungeon. You're
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
clean the dungeon.
yeah. Hmm.
So it's this kind of jokey, almost very casual, very normal thing. Like, the next adventure I'm working on is just about going to the bar and
Hmm.
having a night of fun. It's really inspired by, I really like Warhammer
Hmm.
fantasy roleplay,
Oh
because they
yeah,
had
yeah.
these more mundane adventures. Like, sure,
Hmm.
you had the cultists fighting, but there was also the adventures just like they're just going around bars and doing shit, and I love that. But it's also what I try to do was that to take these mundane things and turn them into fun little fantasy things.
Yeah, definitely. That I mean, yeah. So the book has that kind of first adventure in that you can play along. So, what advice would you give to people running this game for the first time? So, if they're like, okay, this sounds great, I want to get people to the table to play. What advice would you give them?
Hmm, I'd say the best way, and what I've seen people doing, which makes me really happy, is just to, since it has this kind of weird setting that is kind of almost meme like and very modern, but still has this fantasy elements, it just takes something you uh, like really, I've done that, and I've seen people doing it, which is take a meme you like and make an adventure out of it. Uh, that's one of the tips I give, or just like think of dumb situations you've been to and just try to give it a fantasy spin, or like look at the world that you live around, think of
Hmm.
places and try to interpret them as like fantasy tropes. Like, one that I really like, shopping malls are like big dungeons.
Hmm.
Any really big building in our world is like just a big dungeon in disguise. So try to just take these mundane day-to-day things and then just give it a fantasy spin. That is, like, I think, just the real secret here, in a way. And
Hmm.
yeah, like the adventures people have written already and published, they really got that. Just like,
Hmm.
just very mundane, but then it has the fantasy twist, and
Yeah.
then you just let players be players.
Yeah.
Uh, People catch that really fast. There's no real secret, right?
Yeah.
Or or like I could say a generic but always true thing, which is like, which I try to put in the book, which is what I
Hmm.
believe. It's like, you're not playing RPGs is more like having a conversation with friends.
Hmm.
It's more akin to sitting down at a bar and having a drink and chatting, but then there's a game in the middle. It's just
Yeah.
like just an excuse, really.
Yeah, an
Uh,
excuse to spend time together and connect with people.
yeah, and that's always the best tips I think for people who are doing it for the first time. I have a lot of friends who, like, they know that I write RPGs and they get interested and they start
Oh, yeah.
like doing RPGs, playing RPGs,
Mhm.
and they come to me and they ask like, "Oh, I'm gonna run my first game, whatever." And I always they say these things like, it's just a conversation.
Mhm.
Some classic stuff like, "Oh, they won't know if you fucked up as a GM, like, because
Yeah, if it's their first game. Yeah.
that's usually the biggest concern is always with the GM
Hmm.
role. That's why I wrote like a
Hmm.
GM section for this book, which
Hmm.
I'm really proud of, because
Hmm.
it's the hardest role, but people are very insecure about it, and
Hmm.
the reality is like people don't notice if you fuck up, people don't notice if you don't know stuff, and I always try to give those tips in the book too, like to be open when you don't know, just talk to people, say I don't know, what do you guys think,
Hmm.
this kind of thing. Yeah, I say the book has all the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. So if listening to this chat, you are interested in purchasing the book, you can get it on the Soul Muppet store, Soul Muppet store even. And I got the link in the chat or the show notes if you're on the podcast and up in the stream. Up on the stream screen. That was difficult to say. Now, if you're watching live, so that's soulmuppet-store.co.uk products /brave Zenith. Check that out there, or the links in the chat for you to have a look at. So, with the game, one thing I realized we haven't even talked about yet is some of the creatures that characters can encounter, because there are some wild and wonderful things in there. So, could you talk us through and give us some examples of some of your favorite ones?
Yeah, I think my favorite one is the butter golem, butter construct. I think it's called.
Mhm.
It's just a fun. I think the visual is really striking, and it's just like this. It gives the tone really well of the game. Like, I talk about, like, I love food, putting food into games, and that is kind of the way people, let's say, they go, oh, okay, so that's how you do stuff here. So you just take a golem in fantasy and just like, oh, it's made of butter now, and you just go with that. And I love that he has like a butter knife stuck to him, just kind of butter sword. That's from Bacto, the first adventure I wrote. So I
Yeah.
wanted to bring him in because I think it really
Mhm.
sells that. There's the I wanted also to bring like classic. I know it's supposed to be not D&D, but like there's some classic iconic stuff like the Beholder. I wanted to bring that
Yeah.
in a way. So there's the Observer, which is
Mhm.
a big sea urchin that has one eye and shoots lasers, but he's also actually just really shy and socially awkward. That is Dio. So every monster has like a loot table, which is not quite loot. It's just
Yeah.
a way to give them more details. So he has like books on how to talk to people. He has RPGs that's missing pieces. So he's like a shy, awkward little nerd guy, but he's also a terrifying creature. The mermaids, which are actually kids that have drowned in the archipelago and they become these sea creatures with four arms, and they're just pure chaos. They just steal things from you, and yeah, and all monsters kind of have this, which they have a loot table and a mood table, which just I try to give like hints as to how they work without like actually spelling out exactly how they work, because when you try to be specific, it can also be limiting in
Yeah.
my writing style specifically. I always find that when I start writing too much, it gets too rigid, and I don't
Mhm.
like that. I
Yeah.
don't have the skill yet. Um, so these tables are like really funny. They're fun ways to tell little stories about these creatures, and how to also show that, with my hope, that not a lot of these creatures are actually inherently violent or anything. They are just weird little things, and how they can be like starting points for adventures. Like one person who did publish an adventure, he chose the mermaids as kind of a centerpiece, and he got it quite easily that they're not like monsters; they are kids. So he
Yeah.
interpreted that into the adventure, and even made them into more like even a playable. I think there's a playable origin then, uh, and it's just kind of the monsters kind of go like that. And now I'm trying to remember more of them. These there's three are my favorite, like these. There's two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, three actually. Um, yeah,
I
and
think
they just, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there was a called like the Capamera or
Oh
something
yeah,
like
oh,
that.
that's a
Yeah.
great one. That's
Hmm.
a great one. I completely forgot about that one.
Hmm.
That one was kind of. I remember another one too. Oh, thank God you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
So the Capimira was supposed to be a joke. It's a capybara and
Yeah. Hmm.
mixed
Yeah.
with Jabberwocky.
Hmm.
So it's supposed to be this monstrous thing and kind of a dragon, if you will. Uh, and it just came from this idea that I wanted to put like a cliche like Latin America thing, which is the capybara, and fantasy context. And
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to show. My hope is that when I show these dumb ideas that I have, that people can go, "I have dumb ideas too. I can do this." Uh, and
Yeah.
it's easy because you just take ideas from everywhere, and it's like
Hmm.
you steal stuff and you mix them together, and something
Hmm.
new comes out. I like the rubber dragon a lot. It's also one of my favorites, which is
Hmm.
just a kind of a Komodo dragon, but he's made of rubber. Um, so it kind of looks like a tire in the art.
Okay.
But he also
Yeah.
uses it's also to show kind of like how you cannot, like, say, if you're going to fight these monsters, not all of them can be actually fought fairly or straightforward. The rubber dragon is immune to everything because it's kind of like made of tough rubber, it's magical, whatever. But he's immune to everything but his own acid. Like his acid is the
Oh,
only thing
okay.
that can cut him. So there's that joke, kind of not joke, but like this fun play opportunity here. And again, he's called a dragon, but he's not like a traditional dragon. So I tried to bring a Komodo dragon, which is a real life
Yeah.
example. So
Yeah.
it's just a big
Hmm.
lizard. To kind of do this all the time, I was just trying to give a really let's say simple archetypical monsters, but they're also inspired by normal things that you see in the world. Like for instance, the mermaids I talked about. The name is important too. Like I wanted names that were easy to pronounce, or they're easy
Hmm.
to understand and grasp really easily.
Yeah.
Uh, like the observer, a butter construct. Uh, there are some that are Brazilian names, because then there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. Yes.
Like the guará, which is the bird.
Hmm.
Uh, it's the bird as a thief. He has his beak is a lockpick too, so he just goes into people's house and steals stuff. And like rubber dragon, you know, it's always very simple adjective, noun thing, and I really love that because that's the
Yeah.
easiest way to write. Really, adjectives are really cheating
Hmm.
uh, when you write them.
Well,
Um,
it's like you say, it's clear communication then, isn't it? It's like from what you're saying at the beginning with the way you were taught to kind of think about kind of communication. So it's getting that concept across in a really accessible way. So speaking a little bit about, kind of, you said some of the names are Brazilian. Obviously, you're from Brazil, and you said the game is inspired by Brazilian culture. So where else would that kind of crop up in the game? Where would people see kind of elements of that?
the best place to see that is in the art. I think the art really captures that, because that was a big part, was trying to give to show Brazilian culture to that. There are a lot of references that are only understandable to Brazilians too. That was on purpose, because we wanted to really It's also about, like, this book came about in a Kickstarter that had other Latin America creators, and
Hmm.
the idea, like the, let's say, more idealistic vision of Brave Zenith was to be like, what if RPGs were from Brazil, like not from America, not from like
Yeah.
DnD, not
Hmm.
from Gary Gygax, but what if they were created in this other environment? So,
Hmm.
but there's still fantasy. So you can see that a lot of the humor in the art comes from that. And so the artist is a Brazilian comic artist.
Hmm.
It's really that has he specializes in humor. Also, the food that we have in the game. So there's
Yeah.
a tiny cooking system in the game, which make mentions to a few foods, the names of things, but just in general, just the vibe of being here, an adventure that is indebted. So you have that, you will suffer into that. You, you are in a tropical setting, ideally. Um, you in the JRPG inspired stuff. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how like piracy was a huge part of how I play video games when I was a kid. Like, this was the only way to play video games.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
imagine this. Like, my family wasn't poor or anything. Like, we were middle class. Like, video
Yeah.
games were expensive, but
Hmm.
even then, the only way, even if you had money, the only way was to buy pirate games because it was simply impossible price wise. But that also created like this bootleg culture, or like
Mm.
even like a lot of these games weren't translated. There was no games in Portuguese, not even
Yeah.
Portuguese
Yeah.
from Portugal, which is different from Portuguese from Brazil,
Yeah.
as
Yeah. Of
you
course.
don't know. Uh, so like a lot of times we were playing these games that were arcane in a way because we couldn't even read them, and they were from different cultures, and a lot of them were from Japan because a lot of Brazil is the second country with most Japanese people in the world, aside from Japan, because we had a ton of Japanese immigrants back in the early 20th century,
Hmm.
and a lot of cultural, like television. We had good relationships with Japan, so we bought a
Yeah.
lot of their shows. So a lot of what's showing, my mom watched anime in the 60s,
Oh, cool.
70s. So like we have this culture kind of, it's
Hmm.
part of Brazilian culture. Anime is really popular here. It's really strong.
Yeah.
So lots of these inspirations kind of sipping in terms of it's not like the Brazilian influence is not in your face, like punching you. You're
Oh,
not,
sure. Yeah.
and that is something like Brazilians have talked to me about, which is like it's not a cliche representation of Brazil. Like, it's not
Hmm.
like what is often portrayed, which is especially in fantasy, which is the colonial era.
Yeah. Hmm.
Taking the local folklore, which doesn't belong to us. And Brazilian folklore is very polemic because the
Hmm.
common folklore tales were not, they were stolen from the natives
Yeah.
and changed by uh, white people uh, from like the big cities to kind of create a fake, in a way, Brazilian identity
Hmm.
that the colony was struggling with. Uh, so people really appreciated it when we brought these cultural elements that were not so uh, cliche and obvious,
Yeah.
but also we are focusing. Like, I talk about that too when I talk Brazilians well about this game. It's like not trying to show the entirety of Brazil,
Hmm.
because it's too big, and
Yeah.
every
Of course.
region is completely distinct. This is
Hmm.
very specific part of Brazil, part of my reality,
Hmm.
my experience really. So I try to just bring that, and it's like, I hate saying it, but it's more vibes.
Yeah.
And
No. Sure. Mm. No,
uh,
that's great. I mean, yeah, that's definitely great to have, and I love that indie tabletop RPGs have different voices and perspectives, and you can, no matter where you are in the world, you can experience, different vibes from different places. So that's
yeah,
really
I mean, when I think about, like, when I was writing this, I was very concerned about like putting Brazilian references and things, But then a friend of mine convinced me in the way that it's like you grew up playing RPGs that were made by Americans, British
Yeah.
people,
Mm-hmm.
and they too put in their culture in there, and like
Mm.
you learned that you didn't get everything, but you still play them. Like if you could do it, why can't other people do it? It's
Yeah.
the same thing, really.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. Well, we're coming up to near the top of the hour and near the end of our time. So is there anything more about the game, about Brave Zenith, you would like to share with us now while we have the time here?
Uh, I just it's just my favorite thing I've done so far. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's the game I wanted to play. You know, it's very cliche to say that, but it's like it's exactly the game I wanted to make. It's like exactly the game I like to play, and I think it's very light-hearted, fun. It's a very funny experience. A lot of people think, and I agree. And I think it's a tiny little different thing. Maybe it's not the most innovative game. It's not the most uh, out there rules, not even the best rules or anything like that. But I think the whole package is really something special. It's just a different vibe. I think the art is amazing, and it really speaks for the book. Uh, it is the essence of it. Like if I could, it's not even the writing. If I could say, like the writing was the beginning, but if I could say what really is the heart of the game is the art. It really sells that, and I think it's just a game that allows you to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
It does not force you to be creative. More so, gives you space to be creative,
Yeah.
and I think that's just lovely.
Yeah. Well, it's always great to hear people say there was a game I wanted and it didn't exist, so I made it. So that's always kind of the best sort of games, I think, that get generated. Thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about Brave Zenith and share your game with us. If you are interested, you can pick up the game now at the Stole Muppet store, and the links are in the comment section or in the show notes of the podcast you're listening to. So please go and check that out, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their things. Also, if we want to catch you on Twitter and people want to talk to you more about different RPGs, Night Ramen is the best place to catch you online, yeah?
Yep, that's it.
Great. So Night Ramen, we'll put that in the show notes, or it's up on the screen right now. So if you have any other questions and you just missed out the opportunity to ask here, you can jump on there and do that. So also thank you so much for coming on to talk about your game with us, and thank you for giving up your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're very welcome. Next week we are back with Not D&D. We are talking about the Fate core system. So that's next week, and we live stream at 10 p.m. BST. Or you can catch up wherever you're listening to podcasts if you just search for Not D&D. So thanks very much for listening along, and that's all for this week. Bye.